Tonight, we drift into white sands, where cool gypsum sand rests beneath the fading sky, and the dunes seem to breathe in the last pale light. Settle in, and let your breathing slow. We are not hurrying across this white desert, because white sands itself has never hurried, and every soft ridge around you has been shaped by water, wind, sunlight, and time moving with patient hands. You can imagine your feet near the edge of a dune, where the surface is cool rather than hot, almost silky against the skin. The air has a dry mineral quietness, with a faint clean smell after distant rain, as if stone has been washed and left to sleep. Around us, the sand is not ordinary sand at all, but gypsum, a soft mineral made from calcium sulfate and water, gathered here grain by grain, through a long and gentle story. White sands begins in the mountains around the basin, though from here those mountains feel far away, blue and still on the horizon. We stand in the Tularosa Basin, a broad closed bowl in southern New Mexico, where water can flow inward but cannot easily flow out. Rain falls on the Sacramento Mountains and the San Andres Mountains, and for a while it runs in clear threads through rock, carrying dissolved minerals with it, especially gypsum from ancient marine deposits lifted high above the sea. You can feel the shape of that basin as a kind of quiet cradle, holding everything that arrives. There is no river here carrying the minerals away to an ocean. Instead, the water gathers low in the basin, spreads thin across playas after storms, and then slowly vanishes into the desert air. What remains is a pale memory of water, left behind as crystals, crusts, and shining beds of selenite under the open sky. When the sun lowers, the white sand takes on a faint blue tone, and the dune shadows lengthen softly along their own curves. The wind moves without sharpness, brushing the dune face and lifting only the smallest grains. If you kneel and touch the surface, the gypsum feels fine and cool because it reflects sunlight more than darker sands do. It is a desert that holds a strange gentleness, bright by day and almost lunar at night. We can begin with the old water, because white sands is really a story of water becoming land, then land becoming dust, then dust becoming dunes. Long ago, shallow seas covered this region and left behind beds of gypsum as their waters changed and retreated. Much later, the land rose, mountains formed, and those ancient minerals waited inside stone, held quietly until weathering began to loosen them again. Rain and snowmelt touched those rocks season after season, dissolving gypsum because gypsum is more willing to enter water than many harder minerals. You might picture it as a slow steeping, with water passing over pale seams and taking a little of the mountain with it. The streams did not need to be dramatic. They only needed time, and a basin where their dissolved load could settle down and stay. Here, the idea of a dune begins before there is any sand to walk on. It begins as chemistry, as clear water carrying invisible minerals through arroyos and low channels. It begins in storms that pass over the mountains, in the wet scent of creosote after rain, and in the brief gleam of water across desert flats. Then the air returns to dryness, and the basin begins its quiet work of evaporation. As water evaporates, it leaves gypsum behind, often as crystals that can grow clear and blade-like in wet mud. In the lowest places, especially around Lake Lucero, broad crystals of selenite form beneath shallow water and damp sediment. These crystals are soft enough to be broken by weather and clear enough to catch light like pieces of frozen breath. You can imagine them lying just under the surface, quiet and fragile, waiting for wind. The lake is not a lake in the constant way you might expect. It appears and fades, responding to rain, runoff, groundwater, and heat. Some days the playa is damp and reflective, a mirror for the sky. Other days it is pale, crusted, and dry, with mineral patterns spreading across it like slow handwriting. White sands depends on this rhythm, because the dunes are born from the repeated arrival and disappearance of water. We move a little farther into the basin now, and the ground seems flatter, brighter, and more open. The silence has a soft edge, broken only by wind combing across the dune crests. Each grain around you has passed through more than one form. It may have been part of a mountain, then dissolved in water, then a crystal in a playa, then a shard, then a smaller shard, until at last it became sand. This is one of the gentle secrets of gypsum dunes. Gypsum can dissolve in water, so in wetter climates it usually does not remain as loose sand for long. It is washed away, carried onward, and folded back into rivers and seas. But here, in this dry basin, the mineral can linger. The desert air protects what water creates, and the wind carries it into forms that look delicate but endure. If you listen closely in the imagination, there is a faint sliding sound when grains move over grains. It is not loud, it is more like a whisper under a door, a soft shifting at the surface of the world. The wind does not lift the whole dune at once. It gathers loose particles from the playa margins, nudges them, skips them, lets them fall, and then gathers them again. The movement of sand has a patient rhythm. A grain rests, then rolls. It rises for a moment, then lands. It may travel only a little distance in one breath of wind, but over many seasons, these tiny movements become migration. You can feel how modest the process is at the scale of a single grain, and how immense it becomes across miles of white dunes. In white sands, the grains are often made from broken selenite crystals. Weathering cracks the crystals apart, and wind grinds their edges down until they become rounded enough to flow. At first, the pieces may be sharp and bright, like splinters of ice. Later, as they collide and tumble, they soften into sand that can pull through the fingers with a dry, cool smoothness. The dunes grow where wind finds enough sand to gather and shape. The prevailing winds push grains from the southwest toward the northeast, though local shifts and seasonal storms add small variations. Each dune is a moving body, not fixed stone. It has a gentle windward slope where grains climb upward, and a steeper slip face where they settle down after crossing the crest. This is how the dune takes one slow step. You can picture us standing beside that slip face in the evening. The surface is smooth, with small ripples drawn across it by the last wind of the day. A grain reaches the crest, hesitates in the thinning light, and then slides down the lee side with others. The movement is quiet, almost private. Yet that small fall is part of the dune's slow journey across the basin. The color changes as the light changes. At noon, white sands can seem almost too bright to look at directly, a field of reflected sun. Near dusk, it becomes softer, the dunes turning pearl, lavender, and pale gray. The shadows collect in shallow hollows. The air cools quickly. You may feel the warmth leaving the sand under your palm, while the surface keeps its smoothness like flour poured over stone. There is life here too, and it moves with the same restraint as the landscape. Plants hold the dunes in places, their roots reaching down through shifting gypsum to find moisture. Soap tree yucca may stand on pedestals as the dune moves around it, its roots anchored lower in older ground. Skunkbush sumac and grasses catch grains in their stems, making small mounds that can grow into larger forms. The dunes are not empty, they are quietly held. You might notice the tracks before you notice the animals. Fine lines cross the surface in the morning, made by insects, lizards, small mammals and birds moving before the heat rises. The white sand records them with tenderness, then the wind softens them away. Even disappearance here is gentle. Nothing seems erased with force. It is simply smoothed, folded back into the dune's pale skin. The plants help create a calmer landscape within the moving sand. Around each stem, the wind slows. Grains drop from the air and collect in small drifts. Over time, these drifts can become anchored dunes, rising around living roots. When the dune moves on, some plants stretch upward through the sand, keeping leaves in the light while their buried stems hold firm below. This gives white sands a strange balance between motion and stillness. The dunes migrate, but not all parts move at the same pace. Some ridges are active, their crests shifting with every wind. Others are stabilized by vegetation and moisture, resting for a while in place. You can feel the difference beneath your feet, where loose sand gives way more easily, and firmer crusts hold the shape of yesterday. The formation of these dunes depends on a rare combination. There must be gypsum in the mountains. There must be a basin with no easy outlet. There must be water to dissolve and carry the mineral, and dryness to leave it behind. There must be wind to break, move, and pile the grains. White sands is not one event. It is an agreement among many slow conditions. And because it is slow, it feels peaceful to think about. Nothing here needed to rush into beauty. The white dunes formed through repetition, through rain and evaporation, through crystals breaking and grains drifting. The landscape teaches a soft kind of patience. It shows you that even brightness can come from waiting, and that stillness can be made from countless small movements. As we walk deeper into white sands, the basin seems to widen around us, and the mountains become quieter at the edges of sight. The sky has more room here. The dune curves rise and fall like frozen waves, though they are made of dry mineral grains instead of water. Your steps sink slightly, then settle. Behind you, your footprints hold their shape for a while, and then the wind begins to soften them. This is the part of the story where the playa matters most. Lake Lucero and the surrounding Alkali flats are the birthplace of much of the dune sand. When shallow water gathers there, gypsum can crystallize from mineral-rich water as evaporation concentrates what the runoff has brought. The crystals grow slowly, sometimes in clustered forms, sometimes in clear plates, each one holding water inside its mineral structure. You can imagine the playa after rain, wide and shining under a pale sky. The smell would be clean and mineral, with damp earth rising through the dry air. The surface might reflect clouds for a short while, making the desert look as if it has borrowed another sky. Then the water thins, the mirror breaks into patches, and the crystals below continue their patient growth. When the playa dries, the selenite crystals become exposed to sun, wind, and temperature changes. They crack, they loosen, their edges break away. The wind finds these fragments and begins to carry them outward. A single storm may move many grains, but the full landscape forms through countless ordinary days, when light wind touches the ground and lifts just enough to keep the story going. The grains do not need to travel high. Much sand movement happens close to the surface, where particles bounce in low arcs. This movement is called saltation, though you do not need to hold the word tightly. It simply means a grain touches air for a moment, lands, knocks another grain forward, and continues the chain. The dune advances through these small exchanges, like a whispered message passing across the ground. There is comfort in that scale. You do not have to imagine a violent desert. You can imagine a soft, persistent breath. The wind brushes the playa, collects the pale fragments, and carries them toward the dune field. The grains gather where the air slows, around plants, old ridges, and slight rises in the land. From these small beginnings, the shining forms of white sands rise. At night, the white dunes hold moonlight in a way darker deserts do not. The ground seems faintly luminous, not glowing on its own, but giving back whatever light touches it do not. The air cools against your face. Sounds travel differently in open space. A distant rustle may feel close, while your own breathing seems slow and clear. In this quiet, the dunes feel less like objects and more like a presence. The gypsum itself is soft on the mineral scale, much softer than quartz, which makes up many common sands. Because of that softness, grains can break down more readily as they collide. Yet the same mineral can also dissolve and recrystallize, changing form under the influence of water. White sands is shaped by this tenderness. It is durable as a landscape, but gentle in each grain. You may run your fingers through the sand and feel no sharp heat, even after a day of sun. The high reflectivity of gypsum sends much sunlight back upward, so the surface often stays cooler than darker sands. This coolness is part of the place's dreamlike feeling. It looks like snow, but it is dry. It feels bright, but not burning. It belongs to the desert, yet it carries the memory of water. Water is hidden everywhere in this story. It is in the mineral structure of gypsum. It is in the groundwater beneath the basin. It is in the storms that briefly shine across the flats. It is in the ancient seas that first laid down the materials. Even when the air is dry and the dunes seem purely wind-made, water is present as a quiet ancestor, giving the landscape its substance. And we can let that thought settle slowly. The dunes are not opposed to water. They are made possible by it. The bright desert around you is a collaboration between wetness and dryness, between dissolving and leaving behind. White Sands becomes more peaceful when you see it this way, as a place where opposites do not argue, but take turns shaping the same pale world. Farther in, the dune field becomes more intricate. Some dunes form long ridges. Others curve into crescent shapes, where wind has pushed them into barchans. Some join into larger chains, their arms reaching gently downwind. The shapes can seem simple from far away, but each one records shifting airflow, grain supply, moisture, and the slight resistance of plants and older surfaces beneath. You can stand on a crest and look along the ripple marks. They are small, regular, and delicate, like the lines left by water on a quiet shore. Their spacing comes from the wind's touch and the size of the grains. When wind crosses the surface, it sorts and arranges them, leaving tiny ridges that run across the dune face. By morning, the pattern may be different. By next season, the whole crest may have moved. This constant change is slow enough to feel restful. The dune does not leap. It leans, it builds at one edge and releases at another. It keeps its general shape while every grain within it may be replaced over time. There is a deep calm in that, because it reminds you that form can persist even while substance moves through it, quietly and without strain. We continue across the white curves, and the evening deepens. The sky above the basin fades from blue to violet, and the first stars appear over the mountain rims. The sand underfoot makes a faint, dry hush. Your body begins to match the pace of the place. Breath slows, thoughts loosen. The dunes do not ask for attention sharply. They receive it softly, with their long pale slopes and their patient shadows. The geology beneath us is older than the dune shapes we see. The gypsum came from marine evaporite deposits, formed when ancient seawater became concentrated and left minerals behind. Later tectonic uplift raised those deposits into surrounding mountains. Erosion opened them to rain and runoff. The basin's closed drainage kept the dissolved minerals near. Every part of this chain had to happen in sequence, but none of it needed haste. That is why White Sands feels both young and ancient. The individual dune surfaces may change after each wind. The grains may be recent fragments from playa crystals, yet the source materials reach back into deep geologic time to vanished seas and long-buried sediments. When you touch the sand, you touch something newly shaped from something very old. It is a quiet meeting between present wind and ancient water. Life has adapted to this pale world with subtle care. Some animals here are lighter than relatives in darker surroundings, their colors blending into the gypsum sand. White lizards, pale insects, and light-colored mice move through this environment with softness and caution. Their presence is not dramatic, it is intimate. They show how life listens to a landscape over many generations and gradually takes on its tone. You may see nothing moving, and still the dunes are lived in. Beetles shelter beneath plants, moths rest in pale places. Small mammals leave tracks between tufts of grass. Birds pass overhead at dawn and dusk. Roots hold moisture in narrow zones beneath the sand, and microbes live in crusts that most visitors might never notice. The ecosystem is quiet, but it is not empty. The plants are especially patient companions. They endure burial, exposure, dryness, and shifting ground. Yucca can grow upward as sand accumulates, keeping its leaves above the dune surface. When the dune later moves away, the exposed stem may stand like a record of former height. It tells you where the sand once rested and how the plant stayed with it for as long as it could. Around shrubs, dunes can become anchored into forms sometimes called coppice dunes. The plant slows the wind, and sand gathers in its shelter. Over time, the mound grows around the plant, and the plant continues to shape the air passing through its branches. You can feel how gentle that partnership is. A living stem changes the wind. The changed wind places mineral grains. The grains change the ground. In the cooling evening, the colors grow more subdued. The white sand becomes silver, then gray, then a soft blue under the open sky. The mountains turn into dark, still silhouettes. The air smells faintly of dry grass and mineral dust. Nothing here presses forward. The entire basin seems to exhale. You may feel your own thoughts spreading out, becoming less crowded, as if they too have found a wide place to rest. The slow formation of white sands is not only a matter of making dunes, it is also a matter of preserving them. In many places, gypsum sand would be carried away by streams, dissolved by rain, or mixed with other sediments. Here, the closed basin keeps the material nearby. The arid climate limits how much can dissolve away. The wind then gathers what remains and gives it shape. There is a kind of tenderness in that preservation. The landscape holds on to what would elsewhere disappear. It lets a soluble mineral become a vast dune field. It allows bright sand to gather under desert skies, surrounded by dark mountains and sparse plants. White sands exists because the ordinary exits are missing. The water cannot easily leave. The mineral cannot fully escape. So beauty accumulates. As we move onward, the dune faces become smoother in the dimming light, and the ripples begin to blur into shadow. You can imagine lying back on a gentle slope, feeling the cool sand support your shoulders. Above you, the sky opens wider than thought. Beneath you, grains rest against grains, each one having traveled through mountain, water, crystal, and wind before arriving at this quiet place. The science remains close, but it becomes softer when held this way. Calcium sulfate dissolves into water. Evaporation concentrates it. Crystals grow. Weather breaks them. Wind moves them. Plants hold them. Dunes migrate. These are simple processes, but together they create a landscape so pale and strange that it feels almost outside ordinary time. You do not need to rush through understanding it. You can let it settle grain by grain. The wind is calmer now, yet it still touches the crest. A few grains move. Most remain still. This is how the dunes rest without ever becoming fixed. There is always a possibility of motion at the surface, but the whole field holds its quiet shape under the stars. White sands teaches that change does not have to be loud. It can be soft enough to sleep beside. And as we drift farther into the pale basin, the story of gypsum becomes a story of thresholds, where water turns to crystal, crystal turns to sand, and sand turns to a dune beneath the night. The next part of the journey begins near the low shining flats, where the ground remembers water more clearly. Here, the surface may be firm in some places and powdery in others, with faint crusts that crack under pressure. The air feels cooler close to the ground. If rain has passed recently, there may be a mineral dampness in the scent, a clean, chalky note rising from the playa. This is where dissolved gypsum becomes visible again. When shallow water spreads over the basin floor, it carries minerals in solution, invisible to the eye. As the water evaporates under dry air and sun, the minerals become too concentrated to remain dissolved. Then gypsum begins to crystallize. The process is quiet, molecular, and exact, but from it come crystals, large enough to hold in your hand. Some selenite crystals form in rosettes or blades, clear to milky, depending on impurities and growth conditions. They may grow beneath mud, protected from the moving air. You can picture them there, not as jewels in a dramatic cave, but as pale, fragile forms in wet desert sediment. They grow because the water has paused. They grow because the basin gives the dissolved mineral nowhere else to go. The playa is not silent in an empty way. It has the hush of a place between states. Dry mud, damp patches, mineral crusts, and shallow water may all exist near one another, shifting with weather and season. When you walk in the imagination, your steps slow naturally. The ground asks for care. It is a surface that has been written over many times by water arriving, spreading thin, and fading. Over time, exposed crystals weaken. Temperature changes expand and contract them. Wind carries grit across them. Water may dissolve their edges, then leave them again. Larger forms become smaller. Smaller fragments become sand-sized grains. The process is not hurried, but it is persistent, and persistence is enough. White sands begins again and again in this breaking of crystal into brightness. You can feel the beauty of a landscape that makes its own sand from clear mineral growth. Many beaches receive sand from rivers or broken shells or eroded rock. Here the desert grows crystals first. Then, it lets them weather into grains. The dune field is built from a mineral that has already passed through a luminous stage, as if the sand remembers being transparent. When the wind crosses the exposed flats, it sorts the grains by size and weight. Fine dust may lift higher and travel farther. Heavier fragments may stay near their source. Sand-sized particles move best along the ground, bouncing and nudging others forward. This selective movement helps feed the dune field with grains that can build stable slopes and rippled surfaces. The wind is not merely pushing, it is choosing, gently, by physics. Moisture also matters. Damp sand resists movement because thin films of water hold grains together. Very dry sand moves more easily. After rain, parts of the basin may rest for a while, their grains bound by moisture. Later, as the surface dries, the wind can begin again. This pause and release gives the dune field a breathing rhythm, with stillness after water and motion after drying. In that rhythm, white sands feels almost alive, though it is not alive in the way plants and animals are. It responds, it waits, it shifts when conditions allow. It holds shape when moisture, roots, or crusts hold it in place. You can sense how the landscape is always in conversation with air and water. Though the conversation is slower than speech, the soundscape remains spare. Wind across low crusts, the soft hiss of grains, a distant bird in the evening, perhaps the faint dry tick of cooling stems. The desert does not fill every space with sound, and that is part of its restfulness. In the open basin, quiet has room to spread until it feels like another layer of the land. As night gathers, the surface loses detail, and the larger forms become easier to feel. The dune rises ahead, pale even in darkness. The slope invites a slow step, then another. Your foot presses down, and the sand yields with a soft compacting sigh. Behind you, the player lies flatter and more mineral, a place where water made crystals. Ahead, the dunes rise as wind made sleep. The journey from player to dune can take many paths. Some grains may travel quickly during strong winds. Others may remain near their source for years, caught in crusts or damp ground. Some may be buried within a dune, sheltered from movement until erosion exposes them again. There is no single path for every grain. The dune field is made from countless small histories overlapping. This is why a handful of sand can feel more mysterious than it first appears. It is not only material, it is a record of conditions. It speaks of mountains with gypsum-bearing rock, water moving through closed drainage, evaporation under desert heat, crystal growth in shallow flats, breakage by weather, and transport by wind. The story is immense, but it rests lightly in your palm. We keep moving slowly, because the body understands slow places better when it is not asked to hurry. The curve of the dune ahead becomes a kind of guide. Its windward side is long and gentle, made by grains climbing the slope. At the crest, the airflow changes. Sand passes over the top, loses support, and falls down the steeper side. The dune advances by letting its face softly collapse. That word may sound too strong for what you see. It is more like pouring. A thin sheet of grain slips down at the angle where sand can rest. Then it stops. The surface becomes smooth again. Later, another small sheet follows. The slip face renews itself through these quiet flows, and the dune migrates one small fall at a time. At White Sands, some dunes move faster than others. Active Barcan dunes can travel across open areas where vegetation is sparse. More stabilized dunes move slowly or remain anchored for long periods. The whole field contains different moods of motion. Some ridges are restless, others are held. Together, they make a landscape where change and repose are not opposites, but neighbors. You may feel that in yourself as you listen. Part of the mind wanders, and part of it rests. Thoughts rise and move onward, like grains over a crest. Other thoughts settle, covered softly by silence. The dunes do not resist this. They make room for it. They show how movement can become calming when it has no urgency. The pale sand reflects starlight now, and the sky seems deeper because of it. Above the basin, stars appear steady and cold, while below, the dunes hold a dim, softened brightness. The mountains stand around white sands like dark shores around a silent inland sea. You can almost imagine the ancient waters returning, not as waves, but as memory held in mineral form. Gypsum carries water in its crystal structure, and that detail feels quietly fitting. Even dry grains contain the signature of water chemically bound within them. The desert is not simply dry, it is water transformed, water held in stone, water released and hidden again. When you let your hand rest on the sand, you are touching a mineral that remembers both evaporation and formation. The basin's climate keeps that memory from dissolving away too quickly. Rain does come, sometimes in summer storms and sometimes through winter moisture, but evaporation is strong. Water often leaves faster than it can carry gypsum out. Because the basin is closed, dissolved minerals remain part of the local cycle. They may dissolve, move, crystallize, break, and move again, all within the same broad cradle. This recycling gives white sands its continuity. The dune field is not simply using up a single deposit and fading. It is fed by ongoing processes, by the formation and breakdown of crystals around the playa. The supply may vary with climate, groundwater, and wind, but the system has a way of renewing itself. Like breath, it takes in water and gives back mineral brightness. There is a comfort in landscapes that renew without haste. They do not demand witness. They continue when no one is there. The selenite grows under mud. The wind sorts grains in the dark. A plant catches sand with its stems. A ripple reforms after a breeze. The work is ordinary to the desert, and that ordinariness is what makes it peaceful. We are farther from the road now, in the imagination, and the human world feels thin behind us. There are no sharp edges in the dune field at night. The curves soften, the surface cools, the air settles. Even the idea of time loosens, because the processes around you belong to scales much wider than a single evening. Still, they can be felt in this one quiet hour. The moon may rise over the basin, and when it does, the gypsum catches its light with remarkable calm. Shadows become blue, the dune crests become silver lines. Low plants appear as dark shapes with pale sand gathered around them. The scene feels almost submerged, as if we are walking through still water made of light. Yet every step is dry, soft, and faintly whispering. The old seas are gone, but their minerals remain. The basin lakes come and go, but their crystals remain. The winds pass, but their dune shapes remain for a while. White sands is made from what remains after movement, after evaporation, after lifting, after weathering. It is a landscape of residues, but not in a sorrowful way. It is what time leaves when it has been gentle. And as we move from the playa-borne crystals toward the rolling dunes themselves, the white surface rises around us in smoother forms, and the wind's patient hand becomes easier to see. Here in the open dune field of white sands, the wind reveals itself not by sound alone, but by the tender arrangement of every curve. You can see where it has combed the slope into ripples, each small ridge lying beside the next with a quiet regularity. The air brushes your cheek with a dry coolness, and the sand answers beneath it, lifting in tiny grains that catch the fading light. Nothing about this motion feels hurried, because the wind is doing what it has done for ages, shaping softness into form. When you look closely, a dune is less like a hill and more like a slow-moving wave made of mineral grains. The windward side rises gently, so gently that your feet can climb it without noticing the grade at first. Near the top, the surface becomes smoother, and the crest gathers a fine bright edge against the sky. Then, on the sheltered side, the sand rests at a steeper angle, where grains have tumbled down and settled into balance. That angle is not random. It comes from the way loose grains support one another, leaning together until they can no longer hold. In dry sand, that resting slope has a natural limit, and when new grains arrive from above, a thin sheet gives way and slides. You can imagine that slide happening with almost no sound. A soft sigh along the dune face. The dune keeps its shape by losing and receiving itself at the same time. This is the peaceful paradox of white sands. The dunes appear still, especially in the calm of evening, yet each one is a process more than an object. The surface you touch may be gone tomorrow, replaced by new grains from the crest. The curve may remain, but its body changes slowly within it. You can rest beside it and feel the comfort of that truth. That movement can be quiet enough to resemble sleep. The wind at the surface is slowed by friction, so grains do not fly like birds across the basin. Most of them bounce close to the ground, rising briefly and falling back into contact. Each landing can disturb another grain, and that grain may begin its own small leap. This creates a low, near-surface stream of sand, a moving layer only a little above your ankle, carrying white sands forward through countless tiny exchanges. If the wind is gentle, only the loosest grains move. If it strengthens, more particles join the motion, and the ripples begin to migrate. You might watch a ripple crest creep across the dune face, not with drama, but with delicate persistence. The bright grains climb one side and fall down the other. The pattern travels while the individual grains pass through it, much as a breath moves through the body without needing to be seen. The texture under your hand changes with these movements. On a fresh slip face, the sand may feel smooth and newly poured. On a windward slope, ripples create faint ridges against your palm. In sheltered hollows, the grains may lie softer, less sorted, with fine dust tucked between them. Each texture is a memory of air, and when you feel it slowly, you are reading the desert through touch. White sands is famous for its brightness, but that brightness is also part of the dune's behavior. Gypsum reflects much of the sunlight that reaches it, helping the surface remain cooler than many darker desert sands. In the late day, that coolness becomes especially clear. You can kneel and feel the sand receive your warmth rather than giving heat back sharply. The sensation is calming, almost like touching shaded stone. Because the sand is pale, even faint changes in light are easy to see. A cloud passing over the sun can turn the dunes from white to pearl. Sunset can add rose, blue, and lavender to the slopes. Moonlight can turn the whole basin into a quiet silver place. You begin to understand that white sands is not one color, but a surface that listens to the sky and repeats its moods softly. The wind also listens to the ground. Where the surface is damp, the grains hold together more firmly and resist movement. Where a crust has formed, the air may pass over without lifting much at all. Where a plant interrupts the flow, the wind loses speed and sand drops around stems and roots. The dune field is shaped by these small differences, each one guiding where grains pause, where they gather, and where they move on. A soap tree yucca standing in the sand can become a kind of quiet marker. As a dune approaches, its lower leaves and stem may be buried, while the plant continues reaching upward into light. Sand collects around it because the leaves break the wind, and slowly a mound forms. You can picture the plant remaining patient through season after season, half surrounded by whiteness, its green blades steady against the pale mineral slope. When the dune moves beyond it, the yucca may be left standing on an exposed pedestal of old stem and root. That pedestal tells a story of former sand levels, like a soft record held above the ground. Nothing speaks loudly here, but everything records. A plant records burial and release. A ripple records the last breath of wind. A crust records water and drying. A crystal records the chemistry of a shallow basin. In this way, white sands becomes a landscape of quiet archives. The records are not kept in books or monuments, but in shapes that weather, move, and reform. You can walk through them slowly, knowing they will not remain exactly as they are. That does not make them less meaningful. It makes them more tender, because they are temporary forms made from ancient material, held briefly in the open air. The dunes also differ from one part of the field to another. Near the source areas, sand may be fresher, with more broken fragments from the playa. Farther downwind, grains have traveled longer and may be more rounded by collision. Active dunes may show clean slip faces and sharp crests. Stabilized areas may have more vegetation, firmer surfaces, and older shapes held in place by roots. The whole place is one system, but it has many quiet rooms. You can imagine walking from one room to the next. First, there is the flatness of the playa, with mineral crusts and the memory of shallow water. Then there are low drifts, where grains begin to collect. Beyond them rise the more open dunes, smooth and bright, with crests against the sky. Each step carries you farther into the work of wind, and each texture underfoot tells you how long the sand has been free to move. The sound changes too. On crusted ground, your steps may make a faint brittle crackle. On loose dune slopes, the sound becomes a muffled hush. In areas with plants, Dry leaves may whisper against one another, adding a small living note to the mineral silence. The basin gathers these sounds and spreads them thin, so that nothing feels close enough to disturb you. Even motion seems softened by the open space. At White Sands, the dunes are part of a larger hydrologic rhythm, and that rhythm continues beneath the visible surface. Groundwater lies below parts of the basin, helping influence where gypsum dissolves, where it recrystallizes, and how moisture affects the dunes. The surface may look dry and simple, yet hidden water still matters. It binds grains after rain. It feeds crystal growth. It helps preserve the mineral cycle that keeps the dunes supplied. You do not see this water directly most of the time. You feel its absence as dryness, and its presence as coolness after rain, as firmness underfoot, as crystals forming in low places. That hiddenness is part of the landscape's calm. White Sands does not reveal all of itself at once. It lets you sense processes through their effects, like hearing a distant tide in the darkness without needing to see the shore. The mountains around the basin remain essential, even when they are only dark outlines. They supply the gypsum-bearing rock that weathering can release. Rain and snowmelt move through them, dissolving minerals and carrying them down. Without the mountains, the basin would lack its pale source. Without the basin, the minerals would not gather. Without the dry air, they would not linger. White Sands is made from relationships held over geologic time. This makes the place feel wide in more than one direction. It stretches across miles of dune field, but it also stretches backward through vanished seas, uplifted mountains, closed drainage, changing climates, and the slow work of weather. When you stand here, you stand in the present surface of a much deeper story. The sand is new under your hand, but the conditions that made it are old and patient. As the evening lowers, shadows gather in the lee of each dune. The crests remain pale a little longer, catching the last light before the basin dims. You may feel the temperature drop around your arms, and the air seems to become clearer as the heat fades. The white sand no longer dazzles. It glows softly, giving the eyes a place to rest. The landscape becomes easier to enter quietly. The formation of a dune is not only a matter of adding sand, it is also a matter of removing it from one side and placing it on another. Wind erodes the windward slope, carries grains over the crest, and deposits them on the slip face. Over time, the whole dune shifts downwind. You can think of it as a body moving by rearrangement, never lifting itself all at once, never breaking the silence of the basin. The rate of that movement depends on sand supply, wind strength, moisture, vegetation, and the shape of neighboring dunes. A bare crescent dune can migrate more freely than a mound held by shrubs. A large dune may move more slowly than a small one. In places where sand supply is steady, dunes can join, separate, and reorganize. The field is active, but not restless. Its activity has the tempo of weather and seasons. If you could watch White Sands across many years in a single softened image, you would see the dune crests breathing across the basin. They would lean downwind, pause after wet periods, sharpen during dry winds, and blur under calmer intervals. Plants would appear, become buried, persist, or be exposed. Playas would brighten after evaporation. New crystals would form where water lingered. The whole landscape would seem to drift without ever leaving itself. That thought can settle into the body, like a slow exhale. We often imagine change as something that interrupts peace, but here, change is the source of the peaceful form. The dunes are beautiful because they are changing. The ripples are delicate because the wind has just touched them. The sand is bright because water has come and gone again and again. White Sands is calm, not because nothing happens, but because everything happens gently. The gypsum grains themselves carry small differences. Some are clearer, some milky, some rounded, some still angular from recent breakage. In bright light, they scatter and reflect sunlight, creating the field's pale shimmer. In the shade, they gather into subtle grays. Under magnification, they would not look like perfect white powder, but like a varied mineral community, each grain shaped by contact, fracture, and travel. You do not need a lens to feel that variety. Your fingertips can sense the fine looseness of dry sand and the slight firmness where moisture remains. Your feet can tell a fresh slope from compacted ground. Your eyes can trace where the wind has sorted grains into ripples and where a small hollow has gathered softer material. The desert offers its science through the senses first, before the mind names anything. This is why the slow formation of white sands feels so fitting for night listening. It asks for attention that does not strain. You can follow water from mountain to basin, then mineral from solution to crystal, then crystal from fracture to grain, then grain from windward slope to slip face. The path is long, but each step is simple. Each step has the quiet logic of something settling into its next form. The white dunes also change the local feeling of heat and light. Their reflective surfaces send sunlight upward, brightening the air above them during the day. At night, they release heat quickly under the open sky. This creates a cooling sensation that feels almost surprising in a desert. You can imagine the day's glare fading into a clean, pale chill, as if the whole dune field has opened its hand and let the warmth go. Cold air may settle into lower places after sunset, gathering in gentle pockets among the dunes. The surface becomes calm. Plants stand darker against the sand. If there is a breeze, it feels thin and dry, moving along the crest without much weight. The smell is faint, mineral and spare, mixed with the dry scent of stems and distant desert soil. Everything has less color now, and more quiet. In that quiet, the geometry of the dunes becomes soothing. Long slopes meet curved crests. Crescent arms taper into flatter ground. Ripple lines repeat without becoming rigid. There is pattern, but not strictness. The eye can wander without catching on sharp forms. This is part of the landscape's softness, and perhaps part of why white sands feels both earthly and dreamlike, familiar as sand and strange as moonlit snow. The gypsum dunes exist because the usual fate of gypsum has been delayed. Since gypsum dissolves in water, it often disappears from surface environments where rainfall and drainage are strong. But the Tularosa Basin is enclosed, and evaporation dominates much of the water cycle. The mineral remains near home. It dissolves, returns, and recrystallizes. It is not carried far away to an ocean. It stays, and staying allows the dunes to grow. There is a quiet lesson there, though we do not need to hold it tightly. Some forms appear only when things are allowed to remain. The basin holds the mineral. The dry air holds the crystals. The wind holds the dunes in motion without scattering them beyond recognition. The plants hold small mounds. The night holds the brightness in a softer way. Everything here keeps and releases, keeps and releases. As we continue across white sands, the dune field feels larger because the horizon gives so little away. One pale rise hides another. A crest appears close, then opens into another hollow. The walking is unhurried, each step sinking a little and lifting with soft effort. The body slows naturally in loose sand. It cannot move sharply for long. The ground itself teaches a gentler pace. This slower pace lets you notice small things. A ripple crest may be slightly darker on one side because of shadow. A beagle track may cross your path as a dotted line. A blade of grass may bend where grains have piled against it. A tiny avalanche mark may show where sand slipped from the crest earlier in the day. The vast dune field is made more intimate by these details. Even the absence of large objects becomes part of the atmosphere. There are few trees to interrupt the sky, few hard shadows, few vertical lines except yucca and shrubs. The land rests in low curves and open light. This spaciousness can feel like a clearing inside the mind. There is room for thoughts to become quieter, as if each one has been given a slope to slide down slowly. The wind that shapes the dunes is guided by the mountains too. Air moves through the basin, affected by pressure differences, seasonal weather, and the surrounding topography. Stronger winds can arrive in certain seasons, especially when weather systems pass and the dry surface is ready to move. Yet even then, the result we contemplate now is not violence, but accumulation through repetition. The dune field is the memory of many winds, not one. When a grain moves, it may strike another grain and lose energy. That impact may chip edges or set a neighbor in motion. Over many collisions, fragments become smaller and smoother. This mechanical wear is part of the sand's refinement. The grains are not polished by water like beach pebbles, but by dry contact under moving air. The wind is both carrier and sculptor, shaping the material as it transports it. The dune surface can also develop crusts where moisture and fine particles bind the top layer. These crusts may stabilize certain patches until they are broken by drying, trampling, or renewed wind. In the quiet of the night, such surfaces may appear slightly smoother or firmer, holding a different sheen. You can imagine touching one gently, feeling the thin resistance before it gives way to softer grains beneath. White sands is not static even when conditions seem calm. Beneath the surface, moisture can move upward or downward, salts can concentrate, crystals can grow or dissolve at tiny scales. At the surface, wind can rearrange grains almost invisibly. Plants can extend roots or shed leaves. Animals can cross and leave signs. The visible stillness holds many quiet processes, layered together like soft blankets of time. This layered quiet is different from emptiness. It is full, but not loud. It contains chemistry, weather, geology, ecology, and light. It contains the old sea and the present desert. It contains hidden water and open air. It contains life adapted to paleness and movement. When you stand in it with a calm mind, you do not feel absence, you feel room. The gypsum sand also affects how plants survive. Loose dunes can bury stems, expose roots, and change the depth to moisture. Plants that persist here often have strategies for shifting ground, drought, and intense light. Their roots stabilize sand locally, but they also depend on the dune's movement not becoming too rapid. Life here works with the landscape's pace, accepting burial and exposure as part of ordinary existence. You might picture a grass clump catching sand through a windy afternoon. Grains gather at its base, first as a small crescent, then as a mound. The plant reduces wind speed just enough for deposition. Later, another breeze reshapes the mound. The grass remains, bending slightly, its leaves dry and narrow, its roots holding what the air has placed there. This is dune formation at the scale of a living stem. Such small mounds can merge with others or remain isolated, depending on the supply of sand and the density of vegetation. In more vegetated areas, the landscape becomes a pattern of anchored dunes and low interdune spaces. In open areas, sand can flow more freely into larger moving forms. White sands is therefore not only mineral and wind, but a living pattern of resistance, shelter, and release. As night deepens, the living world becomes more present in subtle ways. Some animals avoid the brightness and heat of day, moving when the sand has cooled. Tracks may appear before dawn, crossing the smooth surfaces like handwriting. The pale environment favors quiet movement and careful timing. You may not see the animals themselves, but their paths remain for a little while, until the next wind smooths them away. The smoothing is never harsh. It is like a hand passing over a sheet. The trace fades at the edges, then loses its center, then becomes part of the general texture of the dune. The wind does not judge what it covers. It simply continues. There is comfort in imagining your own busy thoughts treated with that same softness, blurred gradually into a wider quiet. White sands holds darkness differently from darker landscapes. Because the ground is pale, night does not feel completely closed. A little starlight or moonlight can make the sand visible, enough to sense the curves around you. The dunes become soft shapes rather than black masses. The surface seems to float in the dimness. It is a desert, but in nightlight it can feel almost like being inside a cloud that has settled on Earth. The mineral brightness also makes shadows delicate. They are not heavy shadows, but cool blue-gray pools on the lee sides of dunes. A small plant can cast a long, thin shape. Ripple marks create fine bands of shade. These shadows help reveal form when color has nearly gone. You follow them with your eyes, and the dune's body becomes understandable through darkness as much as light. The formation of gypsum dunes depends on continual balance. Too much water flowing away could remove the mineral. Too little water could limit crystal growth. Too little wind would leave crystals and fragments near the playa. Too much disturbance could scatter surfaces before dunes organize. The beauty of white sands comes from conditions held within a certain range, not perfectly still, but steady enough across time. Climate has shifted in the basin's past, and the dune field has responded. During wetter periods, lakes and wetlands may have been more extensive. During drier periods, exposed flats and wind transport may have expanded. The present landscape is a moment in an ongoing story. Yet to us, standing here at dusk, that moment feels vast and settled, because human time is small beside the basin's long breathing. You can let that difference in scale become soothing. There is no need to measure yourself against geologic time. You can simply rest within it for a while. The dunes formed before this evening and will continue after it. The minerals have taken many forms and will take others. Your presence here is brief, but not unwelcome. The landscape has room for brief things. The air cools more now, and you might draw your sleeves closer around your arms. The sand underfoot remains soft, and the fine grains press into the edges of your shoes or against your skin. There is a faint dry taste in the air, almost chalky, though cleaner and lighter than dust. The mountains at the edge of the basin have nearly disappeared into darkness, leaving only their shapes beneath the stars. In the center of the dune field, the playa feels distant, but its influence is everywhere. Every pale slope around you has some connection to those low, wet and dry flats where gypsum crystallizes. The dunes are the playa lifted and rearranged by wind. They are the basin floor made into waves. They are mineral water translated into sand. White sands keeps its birthplace within itself, even far from the visible source. If you follow one imagined grain backward, you might find it first on a ripple crest, then in a slip face, then in a low drift near a shrub. Before that, perhaps it lay on the playa as a fragment of selenite. Before that, it was part of a clear crystal growing in damp sediment. Before that, it was dissolved in water from mountain runoff. Before that, it waited in rock left by an ancient sea. This chain is long, but it moves gently through the mind. Each stage is a kind of resting place. Rock rests in mountain, mineral rests in water, crystal rests in mud, fragment rests on playa. Grain rests in dune. Even when carried by wind, it returns quickly to the ground. The story is less a straight line than a series of quiet pauses, with motion between them like breath between sleeping thoughts. The word formation can sound like something finished, but here it means something ongoing. White sands is still forming. Crystals still grow when water and chemistry allow. Grains still break and move. Dunes still migrate and change shape. Plants still catch sand. Moisture still binds and releases surfaces. The place is not a completed sculpture. It is a continuing softness, renewed by the same processes that made it visible. This ongoing formation gives the landscape a gentle intimacy. You are not only looking at what happened long ago, you are resting beside something still happening, though slowly enough that it does not disturb the night. A few grains may move while you listen. A ripple may shift by the width of a thread. Beneath a damp flat, a crystal surface may continue growing, molecule by molecule, in darkness. There is peace in processes too small to watch. They remind you that not all movement requires attention. Your body continues breathing without command. The desert continues forming without display. The stars cross the sky slowly. The dunes hold their curves. In the stillness between sounds, the world is not paused. It is simply working at a quieter scale. As we move onward, the ground begins to rise into a larger dune, its slope pale and gentle under the moon. The climb is slow. Each step slides a little, then settles. Your legs find a steady rhythm, and your breathing falls into it. The crest ahead looks close, then farther, then close again. Loose sand makes distance soft, stretching it just enough to quiet the impulse to hurry. Near the top, the wind has drawn fine lines across the surface. They curve around small irregularities, showing how air has flowed over the dune. You can see where a plant stem or pebble has changed the pattern, making a tiny wake downstream. The desert's large forms and small forms follow the same principle. Air meets resistance, slows, deposits sand, accelerates, erodes, and leaves a visible trace. At the crest, the basin opens again. Behind you, the slope descends toward darker hollows. Ahead, another field of pale curves waits in moonlight. The slip face drops more steeply, but still with softness. You might sit at the top and let one hand trail through the sand. A few grains spill downward. They join the face below, indistinguishable from the others, and the dune receives them without sound. This receiving is part of what makes dunes feel restful. Nothing stays separate for long on the surface. Footprints, tracks, fallen grains and wind marks all become part of a shared texture. The landscape does not hold sharp boundaries unless conditions keep them briefly. It blends, it rounds, it smooths. It teaches the eye to accept gradual change and the body to feel supported by shifting ground. The gypsum dunes also create a particular light for the creatures that live here. Bright surfaces can make visibility different, especially during full moon or clear daylight. Some animals blend into the sand with pale coloration, a quiet adaptation shaped over generations. Others use shade, timing, burrows, or vegetation for cover. The ecosystem does not announce itself. It lives in small decisions made at the edge of brightness and concealment. For a half-asleep listener, this pale desert can become almost oceanic. The dunes look like waves, but they move more slowly than water. The playa is a vanished lake, returning after storms and disappearing again. The gypsum was born from ancient seas and modern evaporation. Even the wind behaves like a current, flowing over crests and around plants. White Sands is dry, yet its whole story is shaped by water's memory. That memory is held in the mineral name itself. Gypsum includes water in its crystal structure, bound within the calcium sulfate lattice. If heated strongly enough, it can lose some of that water and become another form. But here in the dunes, the mineral remains tied to water at a quiet chemical level. The desert's whiteness is not the opposite of water. It is one of water's resting forms. The softness of gypsum also means the dune sand is easily changed by contact. Footprints can be clear, but they do not last forever. Vehicle tracks, animal tracks, wind ripples and falling grains all compete gently for the surface. Over time, the wind restores a smoother appearance. This is why the dunes can feel untouched, even after being crossed. Their surface is always capable of renewal. Renewal does not mean returning to an exact former state. It means becoming coherent again. A disturbed slope may smooth, but the grains will not return to the same positions. A ripple may reform, but with slight differences in spacing or direction. A plant mound may rebuild after erosion, but in a new shape. White Sands is faithful to process, not repetition. It repeats the gesture, not the exact design. That distinction feels calming. The world does not need to repeat itself perfectly to remain itself. A dune can change and still be a dune. A basin can dry and flood, and dry again, still holding its mineral story. A night can pass into morning, and the quiet can return in another form. The landscape makes room for variation without losing its slow identity. The crest cools beneath you as the night air moves over it. You may feel the fine grains against your palm, each one separate, yet together forming a surface strong enough to hold you. The sky has deepened into a wide, dark blue or black, depending on the moon. The stars seem more numerous over the pale ground. The basin feels both open and enclosed, held by mountains you can barely see. In the distance, the active dunes continue their migration, though in this moment they appear perfectly still. The movement may be measured over months and years, not heartbeats. Scientists can track it through repeated images, markers and surveys, watching crests shift downwind across the basin. But here, as a listener drifting towards sleep, you do not need numbers. You only need the sense of a slow white tide crossing land. That tide is made from grains that never travel far in one motion. They move by increments. A leap, a fall, a rest, another lift. The repetition is so small that the mind can follow it without effort. It becomes almost like counting breaths, but softer. You imagine a grain rising, landing, and resting. Then another, then another. The dune advances, and the night remains calm. The playa and dunes are linked by the wind corridor between them. Sand must be available, exposed, and dry enough to travel. When the wind direction aligns with the open basin, grains can move toward the main dune field. When conditions shift, movement slows or changes. The landscape is therefore seasonal and responsive. It does not form at a single steady rate, but in pulses separated by quiet intervals. Those intervals matter. During still periods, crusts form, plants grow, Tracks accumulate, moisture redistributes, surfaces settle. The dune field is not waiting uselessly when wind is calm. It is becoming ready in other ways. Rest is part of formation. Without pauses, there would be no surfaces to read, no delicate crusts, no time for roots to hold sand, no quiet between the movements. The same is true for the listener. Rest is not separate from the journey. It is the way the journey is received. As you hear about gypsum dissolving, crystallizing, breaking, and drifting, you do not have to keep each detail sharp. You can let them layer softly. The science becomes atmosphere. The atmosphere becomes breath. The breath becomes a slow descent into the pale basin of sleep. White sands has a gentle strangeness because it resembles snow in a desert climate. From a distance, the dunes can look cold even under strong sun. Up close, the illusion shifts. The surface is granular, dry, and mineral, with tiny ripples that snow might lose to melting. Yet the cool touch of gypsum keeps the resemblance alive. You feel the mind accepting both impressions, snow and sand, water and dryness, brightness and night. This doubleness makes the landscape restful to contemplate. It does not force one simple identity. It is a desert made by water. It is a white field that is not snow. It is a moving surface that appears still. It is soft sand made from crystal. It is young in form and ancient in source. Each pair of truths can lie beside the other without conflict, like two gentle slopes meeting at a crest. The surrounding basin floor adds darker tones, with shrubs, grasses, and soil beyond the pure white dunes. These edges are important too. They show where gypsum sand thins, where other sediments mix in, and where vegetation changes. The white field does not simply begin and end like a painted line. It grades, mingles, advances, and retreats. Its boundaries breathe with wind, water, and plant cover. At the margins, the smell of desert vegetation may be stronger, especially after moisture. Creosote, grasses, and dry soil can add a faint earthy note to the mineral air. The white sand may be mixed with darker grains or plant debris. Tracks may be more common where animals move between cover and open ground. The dune field meets the wider desert through these soft transitions, not through abrupt separation. This reminds you that white sands is part of an ecosystem, not just a geologic display. The dunes alter habitat, and life alters the dunes. Plants trap sand and create shelter. Animals move seeds and leave traces. Microorganisms help stabilize some surfaces. Moisture gathers differently in hollows and around roots. The landscape is physical, chemical, and living at once, woven slowly from interactions that rarely call attention to themselves. The slow formation of the dunes also depends on the way the basin floor sits relative to groundwater and evaporation. In low areas, mineral-rich water can rise, concentrate, and leave salts and gypsum near the surface. Seasonal wetting and drying create conditions for crystal growth and breakage. This is not a simple line from mountain to dune. It is a cycle with hidden pathways as water moves through soil, sediment, and shallow subsurface layers. You can imagine that hidden water under the night as a quiet presence below the sand. It does not flow like a visible stream. It seeps, pauses, dissolves, and carries. It brings minerals into contact with air and evaporation. It helps create crystals that may one day become grains. The dunes above seem airy and dry, but their future supply may be forming in damp darkness below the flats. The moonlight makes the surface seem still enough for listening. If you close your eyes in the imagined place, the dune field becomes texture and temperature. Cool sand, dry air, a faint breeze, the hush of open space, the mild pressure of ground under the body, the scent of mineral dust and sparse plants. These sensations hold the science, without needing to explain it all at once. When you open your eyes again, a small ripple may catch light differently than before. Perhaps the breeze has shifted, perhaps your position has changed. The dune's surface is full of these gentle uncertainties. They do not unsettle the mind, they soften it. They make attention less rigid, more like the wind itself, moving lightly over one detail and then another. White sands also shows how landforms can arise from materials that seem unlikely. Gypsum is not the durable quartz of many desert dunes. It is softer, more soluble, more vulnerable to water. Yet under the right conditions, that vulnerability becomes part of its beauty. Because the basin is dry and enclosed, the mineral can survive in abundance. Because it breaks and moves, it can form dunes. Fragility, given the right setting, becomes landscape. That idea can be held gently. The dunes are not strong in the way cliffs are strong. They are strong through renewal, through supply, through the repetition of small repairs. A crest may be cut by wind and rebuilt. A footprint may mark the surface and fade. A crystal may break, but its fragments join a wider field. The landscape endures by allowing change to pass through it. The larger basin holds this endurance. Mountains frame the horizon, and their weathered gypsum deposits continue to feed the cycle. The lowest flats gather runoff. Evaporation concentrates minerals. Winds organize grains. Plants interrupt and stabilize. Each part does its quiet work. No single process owns white sands. The dunes arise because many slow processes overlap in one place, each contributing without needing to dominate. As we walk down from the crest, the sand shifts beneath each step and makes descent easier than ascent. The slip face is smooth, and your feet sink slightly as grains slide around them. The movement is soft and controlled, like walking through cool powder. The dune receives your weight, rearranges around it, and closes somewhat behind you. Even your passage becomes a small part of the surface's ongoing change. At the base, the hollow between dunes feels more sheltered. The air is stiller here, and the darkness slightly deeper. Fine grains may have collected where the wind slowed. A plant may grow in the low ground, its roots finding a little more moisture. The temperature may feel cooler, held by the shape of the dunes around you. These interdune spaces are quieter rooms within an already quiet landscape. Some interdune areas can be firm or even damp after rain, creating temporary habitats and surfaces different from the surrounding slopes. Water may gather briefly, reflecting the sky before it sinks or evaporates. Evaporite minerals can form thin crusts. Cracks may be preserved more clearly in damp sediment. Then dryness returns, and the open wind begins its work again. The hollow becomes another page in the dune field's slow record. You can feel the softness of those transitions as we move through them. Slope to hollow, dry to damp, loose to firm, white sand to plant shadow, windward ripple to sheltered smoothness. The landscape does not break into separate scenes but passes from one condition to another through gradual change. This is why it suits a sleeping mind. It has variation without interruption. The slow formation of gypsum dunes in white sands also depends on scale. A single crystal growing in playa mud is small. A single grain bouncing in the wind is smaller still. A ripple is modest. A dune is larger. The dune field is vast. Each scale contains the one below it, and each can be understood as the same story widened. Mineral gathers, breaks, moves, and rests. When you hold the smallest scale in mind, the place becomes intimate. When you hold the largest, it becomes immense. Sleep often comes when the mind can drift between these scales without effort. A grain, a ripple, a slope, a basin, a mountain, an ancient sea. Then back to a grain again, cool against your fingertips. White sands allows that movement because its story is continuous from tiny crystal to broad horizon. The ancient sea is especially quiet to imagine here. Not a storming sea, not a dramatic one, but a shallow body of water under an old sky, leaving minerals as it changed. Evaporation concentrated dissolved ions until gypsum formed and settled. Later, those deposits were buried, altered, lifted, and exposed. The sea itself vanished, but its chemistry remained. Now, under moonlight, the desert carries that marine memory in pale dunes. This does not make white sands feel less like a desert. It makes the desert deeper. The dry air, the sparse plants, the bright sand, and the open basin are all present now, fully themselves. Yet beneath them is the sense that landscapes carry earlier worlds within their materials. Stone can remember water, sand can remember crystal. A dune can remember a sea. The wind moves again, barely enough to lift grains from the crest above. You might hear the faintest hiss, then nothing. The surface near you remains still. A small tuft of grass bends and returns. The stars continue overhead. The basin has no need to perform its formation visibly in every moment. Much of its work has already happened, and much will happen later when the next wind, rain, or dry season arrives. This patience is one of the great comforts of geological landscapes. They are never asking us to keep up. They do not rush their explanations. White sands gives you one process, then another, and lets them overlap slowly. If you miss a detail, it returns in another form. Water appears as crystal. Crystal appears as sand. Sand appears as dune. Dune appears as shadow. Shadow appears as rest. We continue now along the interdune hollow, where the ground feels flatter and firmer under the pale night. The dune walls on either side are low and smooth, their crests softened by darkness. Your breathing has become part of the walk. The air cools inside each inhale. The silence spreads after each exhale. The white sand reflects enough light to guide us onward without strain. Here, the science of the basin becomes almost invisible, but it remains beneath every step. The closed drainage means the minerals are retained. Evaporation means they concentrate. Gypsum solubility means it can travel in water, and the arid climate means it can remain after water leaves. Wind means fragments can become dunes. The conditions seem simple when spoken this way, but the landscape they make is subtle and wide. The more you sit with white sands, the more you notice that it is shaped by thresholds. Water must be shallow enough to evaporate. Mineral concentration must be high enough for crystals to grow. Wind must be strong enough to move grains, but not always so strong that surfaces never settle. Plants must be tough enough to hold sand, but flexible enough to live with burial. Each threshold creates a soft turning point. Thresholds are quiet places. They are where one state becomes another without needing a sharp border. In white sands, the threshold between lake and dry flat may be a damp sheen. The threshold between crystal and sand may be a fracture line. The threshold between drift and dune may be a low mound around a plant. The threshold between waking and sleep may be this very listening, this slow attention to pale forms in the dark. A gypsum crystal does not know it will become sand. A grain does not know it will become part of a dune. A dune does not know it is moving across a basin. These are human ways of understanding, and they are useful, but the landscape itself simply continues. That simplicity is restful. The processes do not need intention to create beauty. They only need conditions, time, and repetition. The night air becomes still again. The sand beneath your feet is cool enough now to feel almost soft cold through the imagination. The fine grains cling lightly, then fall away. A low plant casts a narrow shadow across the hollow. Beyond it, the next slope rises with the same calm curve as the last, but slightly different, because no dune repeats another exactly. We follow that slope slowly, letting the body lean into the climb. The windward face is broad and low, built by grains moving uphill in tiny jumps. It seems strange at first that wind can push sand up a slope, but it does so because each grain is light enough to bounce forward, strike, and rest. Over time, the slope receives countless impacts, each one adding a little to the upward movement. Near the surface, airflow separates around obstacles and changes speed over uneven ground. Where it accelerates, it can pick up grains. Where it slows, it drops them. This gives the dune its ripples, its drifts, its small sheltered pockets. You can see the physics written softly in the sand, not as equations, but as lines, curves, and tiny ridges that your eyes can follow without strain. At white sands, the whiteness makes these forms especially clear under low-angle light. Morning and evening reveal fine relief that midday brightness may flatten. The side of each ripple turns slightly shadowed, while the crest catches light. The dune becomes a page of pale script. If you stand quietly, you can almost read the last wind direction, the last settling, the last soft rearrangement of the surface. The grains are dry now, and the slope has a powdery give. But after rainfall, the same surface might hold together more firmly, resisting transport until the sun and dry air remove the moisture. The dune field, therefore, has moods tied to weather. A wet period quiets the sand. A dry, windy period awakens movement. These moods pass through the basin slowly, leaving traces that remain until the next change. Rain itself can be gentle here. When it falls, droplets darken the surface, pit the sand, and gather in low places. The smell of wet gypsum and desert plants rises softly, clean and earthy. The dunes may look less bright for a while, their surface is muted by moisture. Then evaporation begins again. The pits soften, crusts form. The sun returns, the wind waits until the grains are ready to move. This rain-to-dryness rhythm is central to the formation of the dunes, because water creates and modifies the mineral supply while wind redistributes it. The two forces take turns. Water dissolves, carries, and crystallizes. Wind breaks, sorts, and piles. Neither one alone would make white sands as we know it. The landscape is the result of their alternation, like two slow voices speaking across the basin. There is no conflict in that alternation. Water comes and leaves. Wind rises and calms. Crystals grow and break. Dunes advance and rest. The desert accepts each phase. You can let your own thoughts follow that pattern, arriving and leaving without argument. The mind can be a closed basin for a while, holding what comes, then allowing the lighter parts to evaporate into quiet. At the crest, we pause again, because the view deserves slowness. The dune field stretches outward, pale under the stars, a landscape that seems made of stillness even while it forms. The mountains are lower shadows now. The sky feels immense, but the sand keeps you grounded. Your hand rests on the crest, and a few grains move around your fingers, small and cool and almost weightless. The slip face below is where deposition becomes visible. Grains crossing the crest fall into the sheltered side, where wind speed drops. They accumulate until the slope reaches its stable angle, then slide in thin sheets. This creates internal layers within the dune, tilted in the direction of movement. If the dune were later preserved in rock, those layers might remain as cross-bedding, a record of ancient wind and sand. In white sands today, most dunes are not becoming stone. They remain loose, active, and responsive, but the same principles that shape them also help geologists read ancient sandstones elsewhere. A dune's internal layers can tell the direction of old winds, the size of former dunes, and the environments where they formed. Here, though, we do not have to look into rock. We can watch the living version resting under moonlight. The phrase, living version, is only a metaphor, yet it feels right in the quiet. The dunes breathe through wind. They drink and release moisture through weather. They grow, migrate, merge, and thin. They shelter plants and receive tracks. They renew their surfaces. Their life is not biological but processual, a kind of earth life measured in grains and seasons rather than cells. You can let that thought pass without holding it too tightly. The important thing is the sensation of the slope beneath you and the calm movement of the night around white sands. The cool air touches your face. The sand supports your body. The silence gathers in the hollow below. The basin remains wide, pale, and patient, continuing its work whether or not anyone names it. As we descend the slip face, the grains loosen around each step. A small fan of sand spreads below your foot. The sound is muted, close and soft. You may feel a childlike ease in moving downhill, but the pace stays slow. There is no need to disturb the surface more than necessary. The dune allows descent, and you allow yourself to be carried by its slope. At the bottom, the sand settles again. Your footprints hold for now, pressed into the pale surface. Later, wind may soften their edges and refill them grain by grain. In the morning, they may be faint or gone. This disappearance is not a loss in the mood of white sands. It is part of how the landscape remains open, offering a fresh surface to light, wind, and quiet passage. The formation of these dunes is often described through processes, but it can also be felt as a series of transformations. Sea to stone, stone to dissolved mineral, mineral to lake water to crystal, crystal to fragment, fragment to grain, grain to ripple, ripple to dune, dune to migrating field. Each transformation keeps something from the previous form while becoming something suited to the next. That continuity is soothing because it makes change feel less like breaking and more like carrying forward. The gypsum does not vanish when dissolved. It travels. The crystal does not vanish when broken. It becomes sand. The sand does not vanish when moved. It becomes a dune face. Even when a dune shifts, it remains part of the larger field. White sands is an extended act of becoming. The night has reached a deeper quiet now. The temperature has fallen, and the sand has given up much of the day's warmth. The surface feels restful and clean, without the heavy heat often imagined in deserts. Above, the stars seem fixed, though they too are moving across the hours. Below, the dunes seem fixed, though they too are moving across seasons. Stillness and motion overlap everywhere. You may hear a faint rustle near a shrub, perhaps only the wind touching dry leaves. The sound passes quickly and leaves the silence wider. In a place with so much open space, small sounds do not crowd the mind. They appear, soften, and disappear. The dune field receives them as it receives tracks and grains, letting them become part of a larger quiet. White sands also depends on the chemistry of evaporation, which is simple to name and slow to unfold. As water evaporates, dissolved ions become more concentrated. When the water can no longer hold them in solution, minerals precipitate. Gypsum is one of those minerals in this basin, forming crystals where the chemistry, temperature, and concentration are right. The process may happen invisibly under shallow water or damp sediment, but its result becomes the sand beneath us. Evaporation is often thought of as disappearance, but here, it is also creation. Water leaves the surface and enters the air, while minerals remain and take form. The vanishing produces visibility. A dry lake bed can become a crystal nursery. A vanished puddle can leave a white trace. In the basin's patient cycle, absence and presence are linked. What leaves allows something else to appear. This is one reason the playa feels so important in the imagination. It is a place where the boundary between liquid and solid remains active. Water arrives with dissolved minerals, spreads thin, grows still, and fades. Crystals form in its wake. Later, those crystals break and feed the dunes. The flat, quiet playa is therefore not separate from the rolling beauty of white sands. It is the beginning of many slopes. The wind may carry grains from the playa outward, but not every fragment becomes dune sand immediately. Some remain in crusts, some dissolve again during later wet periods. Some are buried and re-exposed. The cycle is not a conveyor belt. It is a slow, wandering exchange. Materials may pause for long intervals before moving on. That wandering gives the landscape resilience, because sand supply is spread across many small events. In your mind, you can see the basin across a year. Winter light low over pale dunes. Spring winds lifting grains from exposed flats. Summer storms darkening the sand and filling shallow depressions. Autumn air drying the surface again. Through it all, gypsum changes form, and the dunes respond. The year is only one circle inside larger circles of climate and geology, but even one year contains the rhythm of formation. The body listening at night does not need to organize these circles perfectly. It can drift among them. A storm in the mountains, a shallow sheet of water on the playa, a crystal growing under mud, a dry wind over the flats, a ripple crossing a dune face, a yucca holding its mound. Each image leads calmly to the next, like steps placed far enough apart for rest. As we move farther into the dune field, the whiteness becomes less like brightness and more like softness. The moon gives the sand a muted glow, and the shadows deepen only where slopes turn away. Your eyes no longer search for strong contrast. They settle into gradients. The whole landscape seems made of transitions, from crest to hollow, from mineral to air, from wakefulness to sleep. The gypsum grains beneath us are not perfectly pure in every place. Small amounts of other minerals, organic matter, or dust can mix with the sand, especially near margins and vegetated areas. But the dominant impression remains pale because gypsum is abundant here in a way it rarely is elsewhere. White sands is exceptional, not because gypsum exists, but because so much of it has gathered and remained as dunes. Gathering is a quiet act. It does not always look like movement. Sometimes it looks like things staying where they fall. The basin gathers runoff. The playa gathers mineral-rich water. The drying surface gathers crystals. The wind gathers grains into ridges. Plants gather drifts around their stems. The dune field gathers light. In the night, you gather calm by letting attention rest on each of these forms. This attention can become very soft now. The details are still there, but they no longer press forward. The calcium sulfate, the closed basin, the selenite crystals, the saltation, the slip faces, the plants, and the groundwater all become part of one pale atmosphere. You can know them without gripping them. The science becomes a slow landscape inside the mind, and the mind becomes another basin, holding quiet. A dune ahead curves like a crescent, its arms tapering downwind. This Barcan-like form appears where wind has shaped a mound of sand into a crescent, with a steeper slip face on the inside. The horns point in the direction of movement because they are thinner and travel faster than the thicker center. The shape is graceful, and in moonlight it seems almost drawn with a single calm line. Even this graceful shape is a result of uneven movement. Thicker sand moves more slowly. Thinner arms advance more quickly. The wind wraps around the form. Grains slip down the lee side. Over time, the crescent migrates. You can follow the logic with your eyes, but you can also simply feel its softness, the way the dune seems to open toward the direction it is going. Other dunes may be more complex, merging into transverse ridges or irregular fields where sand supply is abundant and airflow shifts. The shapes tell of conditions, but they also create conditions for what comes next. A dune changes the wind that crosses it. That changed wind affects neighboring surfaces. The landscape becomes a chain of influences, each form shaping the air that will shape another form. This chain is gentle enough to sleep beside. It does not require sudden events. A ridge modifies a breeze. A breeze moves grains. Grains build a slope changes the next breeze. The cycle continues with quiet intelligence, though no mind directs it. White sands is patterned by physics, weather and time, and the result feels almost contemplative, as if the basin has learned patience from its own processes. We pass near the crescent dune without climbing it, following the lower ground where the sand is firmer. The air carries a slight coolness from the hollow. A plant nearby holds a small mound, its branches still in the dark. Around its base, the sand surface is uneven, caught and sheltered by stems. You can see how life interrupts the wind, and how the wind answers by placing grains around life. The mound around the plant may protect roots from exposure, but it may also bury lower stems. The relationship is balanced and changing. Some plants thrive with moderate sand accumulation. Too much burial can stress them. Too much erosion can expose roots. The plant and dune negotiate through growth, wind, and moisture. The negotiation is not dramatic. It is slow and physical, carried out in leaves, roots, and grains. There are also microorganisms in some desert soils and crusts, helping bind surfaces and influence erosion. They are easily overlooked because their work is small and close to the ground. Yet they are part of the quiet ecosystem at the edges and in stabilized areas. They remind us that even a bright mineral landscape contains hidden life, not in abundance everywhere, but in fine, delicate patches where conditions allow. White sands is therefore both spare and intricate. From a distance, it is a field of pale dunes. Up close, it is ripples, crusts, grains, plants, tracks, crystals, moisture, roots, and shadows. The sleeping mind may not hold every detail, but the accumulation of details creates trust. The place becomes real enough to rest in, and gentle enough not to pull you awake. The formation of gypsum dunes requires time, but not endless uniform time. It requires episodes. A wet episode to dissolve and carry minerals. A drying episode to crystallize them. A weathering episode to break crystals. A windy episode to move grains. A quiet episode to let surfaces settle. Over and over, the basin alternates between activity and rest, each phase preparing for the next. This alternation can feel like breathing again. Inhale, the water arrives. Pause, the crystals grow. Exhale, the water leaves. Pause, the surface dries. Inhale, the wind gathers. Exhale, the grains settle. The comparison is only a way of listening, but it helps the body receive the scale of the landscape without tension. White sands forms through rhythms that resemble rest more than effort. The slope ahead becomes smoother, and the ripples fade where the wind has recently poured sand across the surface. You can imagine that fresh layer as a thin blanket covering older marks. Beneath it, other layers remain, each one a former surface. Dunes are layered by their own movement, with internal structures recording migration. The outside seems simple, but inside, the dune holds a history of slopes that used to be exposed. If wind were to cut into the dune, those layers might appear as angled bands. They would show where slip faces once lay, each one buried by the next advance. In ancient rocks, such structures can survive for millions of years. Here, in the loose gypsum sand, they are present but temporary, part of a living dune. The thought is restful because it shows how even loose things can keep memory for a while. The night continues to cool. The air feels thin and clear, with no heaviness around it. Your body may feel heavier by contrast, as if the bed beneath you has become the dune itself. The pale sand supports every point of contact. The wide basin supports the dunes. The mountains support the basin's horizon. The ancient deposits support the mineral story. Support rests beneath support, layer below layer. This sense of being held is central to the calm of white sands. The dunes are soft, but they are not empty. They are made from countless grains sharing weight. Each grain leans into others. Together they make slopes, crests, and hollows. The surface yields, then holds. Sleep can arrive in the same way, not as a sudden fall, but as a gradual sharing of weight with the quiet beneath you. The gypsum dunes do not glow on their own, yet in moonlight they can seem luminous. This borrowed light is part of their character. They receive brightness and return it gently. In daytime they return sunlight so strongly that the field can appear dazzling. At night they return just enough for the eye to follow. The same mineral surface can be brilliant or soothing, depending on the sky above it. The sky and sand are always in conversation here. Clouds cast moving shadows. Sunset stains the slopes with color. Moonlight softens edges. Stars seem brighter above the pale ground. Even darkness is modified by the reflective surface. White sands is not only a ground form, but a light form, a place where geology changes the way the sky feels around you. We continue through that pale light, and the dune field opens again into a broad, rolling area. The curves are longer here, less broken by plants. The wind has had more freedom to work. The slopes seem almost fluid, as if they were poured and then stilled. Your eyes follow one line into another until there is no clear stopping point, only a gentle sequence of rises and falls. In active areas, the absence of dense vegetation allows dunes to migrate more readily. Sand can move across open ground, and crests can maintain sharper forms. The landscape here may seem more purely mineral, though life still passes through it. Tracks may appear after night movement. Seeds may lodge in sheltered hollows. A sparse plant may begin a mound. Even open dunes are part of the living basin, though wind is the clearer voice. The wind's voice is low now. It brushes the crest and fades. You can almost feel the grains deciding not to move, held by calm air and cooling night. Formation includes such stillness. A dune is not failing to form when it rests. It is keeping shape, holding its accumulated sand, waiting for the next suitable wind. Waiting is not separate from becoming. It is one of becoming's quietest forms. This waiting quality makes white sands feel ancient, even where surfaces are new. The dunes carry the patience of the processes behind them. Ancient seas waited as sediments formed. Mountains waited as erosion exposed gypsum. Basins waited as runoff gathered minerals. Playas waited through wetting and drying. Crystals waited under mud. Now the dunes wait under stars. Each stage contains stillness as well as change. A listener drifting towards sleep can rest inside that layered waiting. There is nothing to solve. The landscape has already accepted its own pace. You can let the names soften now, though they remain true. Tularosa Basin, Lake Lucero, selenite, gypsum, evaporation, saltation, slipface, interdune hollow. Each name is like a stone placed gently beside the path, marking where we have been without asking us to stop. The surface ahead shows a faint pattern of ripples crossing a broader slope. The lines are close together, almost parallel, but they curve subtly where airflow changed. They are small enough to be touched with one hand, and large enough to guide the eye across the dune. Such ripples can move faster than the dune itself, passing over its surface like small waves over a deeper swell. The dune's body migrates slowly. Its skin changes more quickly. That difference between surface and body is another quiet lesson in scale. A ripple may disappear overnight. A dune may persist for years while shifting. The dune field may endure across longer spans. The mineral cycle reaches deeper still. When the mind feels crowded by the immediate surface of things, white sands offers wider layers beneath, not to escape the surface, but to place it gently in context. You can imagine lying down now in a sheltered hollow where the slope blocks the light breeze. The sand molds slightly around the body. The sky fills the open space above. The coolness of the gypsum comes through slowly, not sharply. Around you, every grain is resting after its own small journey. Some came from crystal, some from another dune. Some may move again tomorrow. Tonight, they are here. The silence in the hollow is not absolute, but it is generous. A distant wind note, a faint plant rustle, the small sound of your own breath. These are enough. The dune walls soften the wider basin, making a room without walls in the human sense. It is a room made of slopes, shadow, and pale sand, temporary but complete for this moment. Above the hollow, the crest remains exposed to the open air. If the wind strengthens later, grains may cross it and fall down the slip face. They may cover part of the hollow, soften the tracks, and change the slope by morning. The room will not remain exactly as it is. That does not diminish its peace. It makes the piece more delicate, and perhaps easier to receive. White Sands asks us to understand that formation is continuous, but not frantic. The dunes do not need to finish themselves. The basin does not need to become something else quickly. Gypsum moves through its cycle at the pace allowed by weather and landform. The listener can follow that pace by letting each image remain just long enough, then drift into the next. The old marine deposits in the surrounding mountains are still part of the night, though we cannot see them clearly. They rest in dark ridges beyond the dunes, carrying gypsum within stone. Weathering will continue there, slowly loosening minerals. Future rains will dissolve and transport them. Future evaporation will leave crystals. Future winds will add grains to the field. The dunes beneath us are present forms of a process that extends beyond sight. This extension beyond sight is soothing because it removes the need to see everything at once. You can trust that the hidden parts are there. The mountain deposits, the groundwater, the buried crystals, the internal layers of the dune, the roots beneath plants, the small animals in cool burrows. The landscape is more than its visible surface, and its hiddenness is not threatening. It is restful, like depth beneath calm water. As the night goes on, the pale surface becomes familiar. The first strangeness fades, and White Sands begins to feel like a natural place to rest. The sand's color no longer surprises you. The curves no longer seem empty. The silence no longer feels large in a lonely way. It becomes spacious instead, wide enough to hold the slow story of gypsum without needing to hurry toward its end. The wind that made the dunes may return before dawn. It may lift only a veil of grains from the crest, enough to soften the sharpest edge. It may leave the lower slopes untouched, or it may stay calm, allowing every footprint and track to remain until morning light. Either way, the dune field is forming. Stillness preserves the present surface. Movement prepares the next one. There is a deep kindness in that thought. Though the desert is not trying to be kind, it simply offers a pattern that the mind can find kind. Rest is not wasted. Motion is not alarming. Change is not a rupture. White Sands becomes itself through all of them, and you can rest in that same broad permission, letting wakefulness dissolve slowly like gypsum entering water. The image of dissolution is quiet when held gently. Gypsum does not fight the water. It enters it, becomes invisible for a while, and travels through the basin. Later, when water evaporates, the mineral appears again as crystal. Nothing dramatic needs to happen. The change is reversible in spirit, if not always in exact form. The mineral can vanish from sight and still remain part of the story. Sleep can feel a little like that. A thought dissolves, and for a while it is not visible. A memory softens, a word loses its edge. Later, something may return in another form, but for now it can rest in the larger basin of the mind. The dunes outside remain pale and quiet. The gypsum has taught the night how to let things dissolve without fear. The hollow opens into a broader flat, where the sand is smoother and less steep. This may be an interdune corridor, a place between moving forms. The ground here can reveal subtle differences in moisture and compaction. In daylight, you might see faint crusts or darker damp patches after rain. At night you feel them through the steadier footing, the way the surface does not yield as deeply. Such corridors can channel wind differently from dune crests. Air may accelerate through gaps or eddy around slopes. Sand may be scoured from some areas and deposited in others. The dune field is always modifying the wind that modifies it. This feedback is part of its slow complexity. Each shape creates the conditions for further shaping, and the system evolves without any single fixed blueprint. That lack of blueprint makes the landscape feel natural in the deepest sense. It is ordered, but not rigid, patterned, but not mechanical, repeating, but never identical. The dunes follow physical laws, yet their exact forms arise from countless interactions among grains, gusts, moisture, and obstacles. You can trust the pattern without needing to predict every curve. The uncertainty stays soft. The stars above the basin seem to brighten as your eyes adjust. The pale sand reflects a little of their presence, and the whole scene becomes quieter than before. Your body may feel as if it is sinking slightly, not downward through water, but inward into stillness. The dune field surrounds us with gentle slopes, and the story continues at the pace of mineral, wind, and night. White Sands remains tied to Lake Lucero even here, far among the dunes. That low area, with its episodic water and exposed crystals, continues to be one of the important sources for gypsum sand. When the lake bed dries, crystals weather and fragments become available. Winds can carry them toward the dunes, adding new material to the system. The lake is often dry, but its role is active in absence as well as presence. A dry lake is not a dead lake in this context. It is a surface of transformation. It holds moisture below, receives water after storms, grows crystals, and exposes them to weather. It alternates between reflection and crust, between dampness and powder, between hidden growth and visible breakage. The dunes are the outward, wind-shaped expression of that quiet alternation. If we imagine the lake under a pale morning after rain, the water may lie shallow and still, reflecting the mountains and sky. The air may smell fresher, and the gypsum flats may gleam. Days later, the surface may dry into patterns, with crystals and crusts catching the sun. Weeks later, wind may loosen fragments. Months or years later, some of those fragments may be part of a dune crest under moonlight. This long delay between cause and visible form is part of the landscape's calm. Not everything answers immediately. Rain may feed a crystal that breaks much later. A broken crystal may wait before the wind carries it. A grain may be buried before it reaches a crest. White Sands teaches delayed arrival, the softness of processes that do not need to show their results at once. The dune field also changes at its edges, where sand may be lost, stabilized, or mixed into other sediments. Some gypsum may dissolve again during wet periods and re-enter the basin's chemical cycle. Some may be buried under newer deposits. Some may move beyond active dune zones. The system is open within the closed basin, exchanging material among surfaces without sending it easily to the sea. This movement within containment gives White Sands its dreamlike coherence. The basin holds the story, but inside it, the story wanders. Water wanders down from mountains. Minerals wander through solution. Crystals grow in low places. Grains wander by wind. Dunes wander downwind. Plants hold small parts briefly. Nothing is locked, yet everything remains connected inside the broad bowl of land. As we continue, the slope to the right rises higher, its crest drawn in a smooth line against the starry sky. The left side opens into a lower flat where a few shrubs stand apart. Their shadows are thin and blue. The air feels almost motionless. you can sense how the dunes make their own sheltered spaces, small calm zones where wind has less reach and the night seems to pool. In those sheltered zones, finer particles may settle and moisture may linger slightly longer. Seeds may find a chance to germinate. Animal tracks may remain clearer. The dune field's topography creates microhabitats, each with its own subtle balance of light, wind, temperature, and moisture. Even in a landscape that looks uniform from far away, conditions change every few steps. This is another reason to move slowly. Slow movement lets the eye notice that the white desert is not blank. The dune crest is different from the hollow. The plant mound differs from the open slope. The firm flat differs from the loose slip face. The playa differs from the active dune field. White sands is full of quiet distinctions, and each one adds depth to the calm. The gypsum grains underfoot may have angular remnants of their crystal origin, but repeated transport rounds them enough to behave like sand. As grains collide, they abrade one another. As they are wetted and dried, some edges dissolve or recrystallize. The exact texture results from both mechanical and chemical processes. It is a sand made by breaking, moving, and occasionally reworking at the mineral surface. You can feel how gentle that complexity is when translated into touch. The sand is fine but not sticky when dry. It pours, yet it can compact under pressure. It cools quickly, yet remembers sunlight in the day. It is mineral, but its whiteness makes it seem almost soft beyond touch. The hand understands what the explanation only points toward. The place is made of small, cool brightness. The night does not erase the day's history. It only quiets it. Earlier, sunlight reflected from the dunes. Warm air rose. Wind may have crossed the playa. Visitors may have left footprints. Insects may have sheltered beneath plants. Now the temperature has fallen, and the bright glare has become a low glow. The same landscape has changed its voice, speaking now in hush rather than brilliance. White sands may be most restful in this imagined hour, because the visual intensity has softened. The dunes still hold their pale identity, but they no longer demand the eyes. Their shapes become something the mind can lean against. The science can continue quietly in the background, like a low radio voice in another room, explaining without urgency how water, mineral, and wind have made this place. We walk on, and the sand's surface shifts from rippled to smooth again. Perhaps a recent slip has covered the older texture. Perhaps the wind was too steady to leave strong ripples here. The smoothness gives the slope a poured appearance, as if a pale liquid had flowed and then settled into silence. You can almost see the mineral's earlier life as solution returning in the shape of the dune. That resemblance is not accidental in feeling, even if the processes differ. Gypsum has passed through water, and the dune forms resemble waves because wind behaves as a fluid. Air flows over sand much as water flows over a bed, creating ripples, sorting grains, and building migrating forms. The desert and the ocean are not separate in the language of physics. They echo one another softly. This echo suits white sands especially well. Ancient seas made the source mineral. Modern water dissolves and recrystallizes it. Wind creates wave-like dunes. The white field looks like frozen surf under the moon. Every part of the place seems to remember water, even when dry. That memory does not disturb the desert. It gives the desert depth, like a quiet song heard beneath another. The mind can float on that echo now, not drifting away from the topic, but deeper into it. Gypsum dunes are geological waves made from evaporated water and ancient seas, moved by air across a closed basin. The phrase is scientific, but the image is peaceful. Air has become a current. Sand has become a slow tide. The basin has become a shoreless bowl of pale motion. A small rise ahead catches more moonlight than the surrounding ground. As we approach, its surface shows tiny wind-made steps, each one only a slight change in texture. The crest is low, still forming, perhaps a young drift beginning to organize into a dune. Not every mound becomes large. Some are reshaped, merged, or flattened. The dune field contains beginnings that may or may not continue. Beginnings in white sands are often modest. A plant slows the wind. A small irregularity catches grains. A patch dries before its surroundings. A slight rise changes airflow. Sand gathers. The mound grows if supply and wind continue. If conditions shift, it may fade. This makes the landscape feel forgiving. Not every start needs to become permanent. Some forms exist briefly, contribute texture, and pass back into the field. The same is true of ripples, tracks, and crusts. They are temporary, but they matter while present. A ripple affects the next grains moving over it. A track changes local airflow in a tiny way. A crust holds a surface until it breaks. Temporary forms still shape the future. White sands is built from such brief influences, layered so patiently that they become lasting landscape. The air remains cool and nearly scentless, except for that faint mineral dryness and the occasional trace of desert plants. The quiet is broad enough to make each breath audible. Your body may feel warm against the imagined cool of the sand. The contrast is gentle. You are not separate from the landscape in this listening. You are another quiet presence resting among slow forms. As we pass the young drift, we can sense the future dune within it, though it may never fully form. If it grows, its windward slope will lengthen, its crest will sharpen, a slip face may develop. It may move downwind, merge with another dune, or become anchored by vegetation. Its future depends on the same patient conditions that shaped the larger field. There is no hurry in finding out. The basin itself has changed over long periods, and white sands has adjusted with it. Lakes have expanded and contracted. Climates have shifted. Sediments have been exposed and covered. The present dune field is a chapter in a longer environmental history. Yet this chapter is enough for tonight. We are with the dunes as they are now, pale, cool, and slowly forming under a wide New Mexico sky. The location matters because few places combine these conditions so clearly. A closed basin, abundant gypsum, arid climate, episodic water, exposed crystal sources, and strong enough winds come together here. If one element were missing, the landscape would be different. White sands is a precise calm, not a generic desert. Its serenity comes from a very particular arrangement of land, mineral, water, and air. That particularity makes the place easier to imagine deeply. The Tula Rosa Basin is not just a backdrop, it is the container that allows the minerals to stay. Lake Lucero is not just a flat, it is a source of crystal and sand. The surrounding mountains are not just scenery, they are the old storehouses of gypsum. The wind is not just weather, it is the hand that turns fragments into dunes. With each of these roles understood softly, the landscape becomes more complete. You can rest in it without needing spectacle. The spectacle is the slowness itself, the way ordinary processes have made something luminous. Rain falls, water dissolves, evaporation concentrates, crystals grow. Wind breaks and carries, grains settle. Over time, a white desert appears, cool under moonlight, quiet enough for sleep. We move now toward another broad hollow, where the dune slopes lean away on both sides. The sand here is smooth and faintly compacted. The sky above seems larger because the surrounding crests are lower. Your steps are steady. The body has accepted the rhythm of the ground. Each footfall sinks, presses, and lifts, leaving a mark that will belong to the dune only briefly. The idea of belonging briefly is peaceful here. A footprint is not an intrusion forever. A track is not a scar. The dune surface is able to receive and renew. Wind and time do their soft work. The gypsum grains move on. The place remains itself through this ability to change. It does not need to preserve every mark in order to preserve its deeper identity. The deeper identity is the cycle. White sands is not one fixed arrangement of dunes, but the continuing formation of gypsum landforms in a basin that holds their materials. Individual crests may shift. Individual grains may dissolve or move. Individual plants may grow, bury, and die back. The identity remains in the repeated relationships among mineral, water, wind, and life. That is the heart of the landscape's calm. As we settle into that understanding, the night seems to slow even more. The words can become softer. The dunes can become less sharply outlined. The science can remain present, like a gentle current beneath the surface. White sands is still forming, grain by grain, crystal by crystal, breath by breath of wind. You are here only for a quiet while, and the basin is wide enough to hold that while completely. A faint breeze returns across the hollow, barely touching the surface. It does not lift much sand, but you can see a few grains tremble where the slope begins. The movement is so small, it feels private. The dune is not asleep exactly, but resting lightly. Even in rest, it remains ready for the next shift, the next dry gust, the next thin slide over the crest. The breeze passes, and stillness follows. The pale dunes wait under the stars, their surfaces holding the last patterns made by air. Somewhere beyond sight, the playa lies open and quiet, perhaps dry, perhaps faintly damp beneath the crust. Somewhere below its surface, gypsum may be growing in darkness. Somewhere in the mountains, old mineral beds wait for the next rain. The whole system rests in separate places at once. This separation is only apparent. The rain in the mountains, the crystal in the playa, the grain on the dune, and the plant in the hollow are all parts of one slow basin story. They do not need to touch in this exact moment to be connected. Time connects them. Water connects them. Wind connects them. The shape of the land connects them. White sands is connection made visible as brightness. You can feel the connection in the way one image leads naturally to another. Mountain rain becomes runoff. Runoff becomes mineral water. Mineral water becomes crystal. Crystal becomes sand. Sand becomes dune. Dune becomes habitat. Habitat becomes track and root and shadow. Shadow becomes night. Night becomes rest. Each image is a step downward into calm. Not away from the topic, but deeper into its formation. The surface beneath us grows slightly firmer again, perhaps where moisture has lingered or where grains have been compacted by previous winds. It feels supportive, less yielding. The change is subtle, but the feet notice. In a landscape of sand, firmness is a message. It tells of water, pressure, crust, or repeated settling. The ground speaks through resistance as well as softness. In daylight, such surfaces might reveal polygonal cracks or delicate mineral crusts, especially near playa margins. The patterns form as wet sediment dries and shrinks, or as salts concentrate. These textures are part of the basin's evaporative life. They are less smooth than the dunes, more like parchment or pale clay, but they feed the same story because they mark the places where water has recently been and left something behind. The dunes beyond them are the mobile expression of that leaving behind. Once crystals and fragments are free, wind can carry them into the more open field. The material changes from crust to grain, from flat to slope, from reflective sheet to rippled surface. The transformation is gradual, and some material may cycle back, dissolving again or being buried. White sands is not a one-way journey, but a patient circulation. The circulation has no need for urgency. It is enough that the basin remains closed, the climate remains dry enough, and the winds return. Human lives may notice only a portion of the movement, but the dunes do not depend on being noticed. They continue forming in darkness, in daylight, in seasons of storm and seasons of calm. Their work is quiet, and that quiet is what we borrow tonight. As the imagined walk continues, the body may feel less like walking and more like drifting. The sand's resistance slows every movement. The pale slopes guide the gaze without demanding decisions. The cool air settles over the skin. Each paragraph of the landscape seems to open into another, not with a break, but with a soft continuation, as if the dunes themselves were speaking in long, unhurried sentences. The next rise is lower than the last, and its crest has been rounded by recent wind. Rounded crests can indicate that sharp edges have been softened, perhaps by winds from varying directions, or by surface moisture and settling. A sharp crest feels active and freshly supplied. A rounded crest feels more rested. Both belong to the dune field. Both are moments in its breathing. You may stand beside the rounded crest and notice how the light spreads over it without catching a hard line. The shadow is gradual. The surface looks calm, almost polished, though it is still made of loose grains. If the wind changes tomorrow, the crest may sharpen again. The form is not fixed. It is a temporary state of balance between supply, wind, and rest. Balance is everywhere in white sands. Gypsum dissolves enough to move through water, but remains enough to form dunes. Wind moves grains, but not always so much that all surfaces vanish. Plants stabilize sand, but not so completely that the field becomes fixed. Moisture binds grains, then releases them. Each balance point shifts with weather and time, and the dunes are the visible outcome of those shifting balances. The mind can rest in balance without needing to freeze it. A balanced dune is not motionless forever. A balanced breath is not held forever. It passes into the next breath. The crest passes into the next slope. The crystal passes into the next grain. White Sands offers this kind of balance, living at the edge of movement and stillness, giving the listener a place to settle without becoming rigid. The white surface reflects the stars faintly, though not as water would. It does not mirror, it diffuses. Light touches the grains and scatters, losing sharpness. That scattering is part of why the landscape appears soft. Even light is broken into gentler directions here. It does not strike and remain harsh. It spreads, quiets, and settles over the dunes like a pale covering. During the day, the same scattering can make the field intensely bright, so bright that the eyes seek shade or distance. But at night, under low light, it becomes tender. The dunes reveal themselves without glare. The forms remain visible just enough. The sleeping mind prefers this softer version where the place is not hidden but not demanding, present in the way a calm voice is present in a dark room. We keep moving within that voice, and White Sands continues to unfold through small, patient facts. Gypsum is calcium sulfate with water held in its structure. Selenite is a clear crystal form of gypsum. Evaporation leaves minerals behind. Closed basins retain dissolved materials. Wind moves sand through bouncing, rolling, and sliding. Plants slow air and gather grains. Dunes migrate by losing sand from one face and gaining it on another. Each fact is simple, but together they create a landscape that feels almost impossible at first glance. A white gypsum dune field in a desert basin, made from water-soluble mineral, preserved by dryness, fed by temporary lakes, shaped by wind. The more you understand it, the more peaceful it becomes, because its strangeness is not magic. It is a rare harmony of ordinary processes, given enough time. The rare harmony continues around you now. The dune slopes lean into the dark. The hollow waits. The playa lies beyond. The mountains hold their old deposits. The air carries a little coolness across the sand. You may feel your thoughts loosening, not disappearing suddenly, but becoming less angular, as if they too are being rounded by a long, gentle passage through wind and time. A few grains slide from the crest above, perhaps loosened by the breeze or by their own delicate balance. They move only a short distance, then stop. The sound is almost too small to hear, but you can imagine it as a whisper. That whisper is enough to remind us that the dune is never entirely still. It is resting in motion, moving in rest, holding both truths in the same pale shape. The basin darkens slightly as a thin cloud passes over the moon. The dunes lose some of their glow, becoming softer and more grey. Shadows widen. The stars dim behind the cloud. For a few moments, the landscape feels even quieter, less defined, closer to sleep. Then the cloud thins, and the pale surfaces return slowly, without surprise, as if the dunes have simply breathed back into view. Light changes are another kind of weather here. They do not alter the sand materially in every moment, but they alter how the dune field is received. A bright noon reveals scale and glare. A cloudy afternoon softens contrast. A sunset paints color into the mineral surface. A moonlit night turns geology into a calm dream. White Sands is always itself, yet never quite the same to the eye. This changing appearance can help the listener drift, because it gives the mind motion without disturbance. The dunes brighten and dim. The wind rises and fades. The sand loosens and firms. The water arrives and evaporates. The crystals grow and break. Every movement is slow enough to follow and soft enough to release. The story continues, and there is no need to hold it all at once. We come now to a place where the dune face shows faint scalloped marks, small curves left by recent surface flow. These may be traces of grain movement down the slip face, where thin avalanches have spread and stopped. The marks are delicate, overlapping, and already beginning to soften. You can see how gravity assists the wind here, pulling grains into rest once they cross the crest. Gravity is the quiet partner in every dune. Wind lifts and pushes, but gravity returns grains to the surface. It shapes the slip face, governs the angle of rest, and settles each bouncing particle after its small leap. Without gravity, the grains would not gather into slopes. With it, they come back down, again and again, and the dune becomes a stable form made from falling. Falling sounds dramatic, but here it is soft. A grain falls a few inches. A thin sheet slides a short distance. A slope adjusts gently. The word can be held without fear, because the movement is intimate and small. White sands is full of falling that does not disturb, falling that builds, falling that makes rest possible. The dune grows because grains are allowed to come down. The body knows this too. Sleep often arrives as a kind of allowed descent, not a drop, but a letting down of attention. The dunes make that descent visible in mineral form. Grains rise in the wind, then settle. Thoughts rise in the mind, then settle. The surface changes, but the larger calm remains. You can follow the sand downward and let yourself become quieter with it. The scalloped marks fade behind us as we move along the base of the slope. The sand here is fine and cool, gathered where the slip face meets the hollow. This meeting line may shift as the dune migrates, covering former ground and exposing new areas behind. The dune's movement is not only forward, but also a continual remaking of its own edges. It defines itself by changing where it meets the flat. Edges in white sands are often soft. The base of a dune grades into the hollow. The white field grades into darker desert. The playa grades into dune source. The day grades into night. Even the mineral cycle grades between solid and dissolved forms. There are thresholds rather than abrupt endings. This softness of edges is part of the sleepfulness of the place. As we continue through the hollow, the ground becomes lightly rippled again, showing that wind can work even in lower spaces. The ripples are smaller than those on open slopes, and their shadows are faint. You might brush them with your fingertips and erase a few lines. The surface would accept the touch, then wait for the next wind to write again. Nothing here needs to remain untouched to remain beautiful. The concept of disturbance is different in an active dune field. Natural disturbance is the mechanism of form. Wind disturbs the surface, and ripples appear. Sliding disturbs the slope, and the slip face renews. Water disturbs the playa, and crystals grow or dissolve. Plants disturb airflow, and mounds gather. The landscape is not harmed by change that belongs to its own rhythm. It is made by it. Of course, some disturbances are outside that rhythm, and protected places ask for care. But in this narration, we keep to the natural processes, the slow shaping that white sands has known across time. We move gently in imagination, leaving no lasting mark. We are witnesses to the basin's patience, not owners of it. That stance keeps the mood quiet and respectful, like lowering the voice in a spacious room. The dunes ahead appear slightly higher, and their crests overlap in layers. The nearest is pale gray, the next is lighter, the farthest is almost white against the sky. Depth reveals itself through tone rather than detail. The eye follows the sequence and relaxes. There is no sharp focal point. The whole view invites a broad, unfixed gaze, the kind that comes naturally before sleep. In such a gaze, the dune field seems less like separate hills and more like a continuous surface folded by wind. Each fold has its own history, but together they make one pale fabric across the basin. The fabric is not woven from thread, but from grains. It is not fixed, but it holds together. It covers the basin floor in curves that shift slowly under the open sky. The word fabric brings us back to the feel of the sand itself, fine and granular, yet able to drape over landforms. It covers low obstacles. It wraps around plants. It spills over crests. It fills hollows and thins over firmer ground. The dune field behaves like a loose covering, shaped by air and gravity, always settling into the available form, while also creating new forms of its own. This dual role is important. Sand responds to the ground beneath it, but as it gathers, it becomes ground itself. A small drift becomes a mound becomes a dune redirects wind and affects future deposition. The material is both passenger and builder. White sands is a landscape where tiny grains, each easily moved, collectively reshape the basin floor. There is reassurance in collective smallness. No single grain must do much. It moves a little, rests, and joins others. Yet, together they create miles of pale dunes visible from far away. The landscape's grandeur comes from uncountable small actions repeated over time. For a tired mind, that can be comforting. It suggests that largeness does not always require force. Sometimes it comes from patience multiplied. The night is quiet enough now that the imagined sound of sand becomes almost internal. A hush, a soft settling, a faint grainy whisper under the words. Your breathing may be slower than before. The body may feel more horizontal, more supported, even as the narration continues to walk. White Sands becomes both a place and a pace, guiding attention through a bright desert that has learned to speak softly in darkness. Ahead, the pale slopes lead us onward, not toward an ending, but toward another layer of the same patient formation. The gypsum has more forms to take. The dunes have more curves to reveal. The basin has more quiet processes hidden beneath its surface, and we move with them slowly, following the wind's old path across the sand as it carries the mineral memory of water into the next white hollow. The last hollow opens softly around us, and the dunes no longer seem to lead anywhere beyond themselves. White Sands rests under the night, pale and cool, with the gypsum grains lying close together after their long passage through water, crystal, wind, and quiet. The air is still enough that even the smallest movement feels folded into silence. You can let your hands rest in the sand and feel its fine mineral softness, bright even in darkness, as if the basin is holding a little moonlight for you. Here, the formation continues without needing to be watched. Somewhere far behind the dunes, a damp flat may be growing a crystal in the dark. Somewhere along a crest, one loose grain may settle into place. Around a plant stem, a small drift may wait for morning wind. But here, in this hollow, the surface is calm, and the long work of White Sands feels less like motion now and more like rest. The mountains have faded into the edge of the sky, and the basin holds its breath in a wide, gentle stillness. The sand beneath you is not empty. It is old water, old stone, old sea, old light, softened into a place where nothing needs to hurry. The dunes rise around you like sleeping waves, and their pale slopes ask nothing more than quiet attention. So you can let the story loosen now. Let the wind go still. Let the crystals remain hidden. Let the grains rest where they have fallen. The white sand has been forming for a very long time, grain by grain. And now you are here, in the cool hollow of White Sands, where the night is wide, the dunes are soft, and everything is finally quiet.